So I'm going to do a quick intro and then we can get started. So first off, to everyone attending, hello and thank you so much for joining us for our first session of our Desert Foothills Library virtual author event series, which is sponsored by the American Library Association. The series is free and open to anyone who would like to learn more about these amazing authors. So coming up, we have Garth Stein on March 23rd and Kevin Grazier on April 1st. And if you'd like to find out more about those events, go to dfla.org. So Jordan Ifueko is the supremely talented author of the YA epic fantasy duology, Raybearer and Redemptor. The first book is described on Goodreads, follows Tarisai, who has always longed for the warmth of family. She was raised in isolation by a mysterious, often absent mother known only as the Lady. The Lady sends her to the capital of the global empire of Aritsar to compete with other children to be chosen as one of the Crown Prince's Council of 11. If she's picked, she'll be joined with the other council members through the Ray, a bond deeper than blood. That closeness is irresistible to Tarisai, who has always wanted to belong somewhere. But the Lady has other ideas, including a magical wish that Tarisai is compelled to obey: kill the Crown Prince once she gains his trust. Tarisai won't stand by and become someone's pawn, but is she strong enough to choose a different path for herself? This series creates a rich, complex, and enthralling world with 13 distinct cultures and a diverse cast of characters. It broaches complex themes like found family, healing from trauma, economic disparities, forced cultural assimilation, gender description, and oh so many others. It represents some of the best current YA has to offer. And also, I have to say, they're some of the most beautifully bound books I've ever seen, which you can also pick up copies at Desert Foothills Library, even on the book itself. Look at that gorgeous foil. So during the session, please type any questions you have in the QA section or the chat box, whichever is easier for you. So Jordan, thank you again for joining us. We are so honored to have you.
Thank you so much for having me. And again, apologies for my lateness. I just want to say real quick, I always say this for library events, thank you for being a library, for being a librarian. They were my safe space as a kid. I was like homeschooled until high school, so I practically lived in the library.
Thank you. And we actually have a lot of homeschool families come to our library, so we love it just being a space for anybody and everybody.
Mm-hmm.
I guess just to start us off, could you tell us a little bit about yourself and how you became an author?
Sure. So I wanted to become an author almost as soon as I knew what one was. Homeschooling, I have a lot of really mixed feelings about my homeschooled experience, but one of the things that made me what I am is that when you're homeschooled, any bit of media that makes it to you has an amplified effect on your view of the world, right? So like a lot of my idea of different places and things came from books, came from television shows, came from movies. And so the fact that people could make these worlds, just make a new place for you to live in your head when I was a kid, it seemed like magic. It seemed like breathing, both natural and extraordinary. And so I'm told, I don't remember this as much, but I'm told by my very affectionate aunties that I was always looking for something to write on, even if it was like a napkin scrapped somewhere, to write something down, to write a story, to write a character. So yeah, that's my early journey. And the journey of Raybearer actually started when I was 13. So when I was 13, I got to go to school for the first time. It was this tiny private school. My graduating class was 17 people. I went in and I tested into 10th grade, but I was 13. And so I was younger than everybody, but it was also my experience, my first experience spending like 6 hours every day with this close-knit group of teenagers, just 17 people, every single day for, like 10th grade through 12th grade. And so it was such a formative experience for me. I just wanted to immortalize it. So I started writing about these teenagers who are like being groomed to rule the empire, and they're so close and they're going to be best friends forever. And then what would eventually become Ray Bear in my later 20s evolved out of that initial um, project that I wrote, just to feel like I was in control of this very special experience that was happening to me as a kid.
Awesome. And kind of tying into that, we have a question from Sarah. So after that initial idea and kind of capturing, that experience from your kind of formative 10th to 12th grade school years, as it developed, where did your inspiration come from, as you added in like all the different cultures and economies and all of that?
Yeah, so Ray Bear grew up as I did. Initially, obviously there wasn't a lot of fantasy with people who looked like me, especially when I was growing up. There isn't that much now, as much as people like to say, even though we have so many new titles, and that's really great. There's still kind of a drop in the bucket. But at the time, I knew that I didn't want to write about Eurocentric settings. I still knew I didn't quite fit, but I also didn't feel permission to write about just very specific cultures of people of color, because I'd never seen that. So my first drafts of Ray Bear as a teenager, it was kind of a hot mess of vagueness. It's like everyone had this kind of like vague Afro-Latiny names, and each of the cultures were still just like, I don't know, like I was just trying to like, it was like looking at a smudge. It's just like, yes, this smudge is the culture and here's the story. And it wasn't until I got to college that I just got fed up. I was like, nope, cultures are specific things. And plus, in the world we live in, if you are vague with a culture, people will automatically put in Eurocentric ideas of this culture. They're going to impress a Eurocentric setting, Eurocentric cultures, Eurocentric customs. If you say castle, they're going to imagine like an Arthurian castle, that kind of thing. So you have to be specific if you want them to see your world as anything but white. And so that's when I went to the other extreme, which is like, no, the Oluwani people are based on the Yoruba, Swana is based on the Shona of East Africa, this place is based on Han Chinese, this place is based on like Joseon period Korea. And while that was awesome, and I don't regret it, that the kind of research needed for cultures based on real world cultures, especially when you madly choose to make 13 of them, is bonkers. Like, yeah, like I think definitely for future projects, I'll like kind of split the difference where it's like, okay, yes, we have some influences from these cultures, but this is its own thing, because when you do decide to loosely base it on real world cultures, you need to be careful, you need to be respectful. Which is obviously a good thing, but it is a lot of work for 13 of them. Where it's like, oh crap, can they eat plantain? Were plantains like farmed in this part of East Africa at this period in history? I don't know. So those kind of things. I always do this. I lose sight of the initial question because I just start chatting.
No.
What are we talking
I've
about?
got so many more questions just based off of that.
Yeah.
Yeah, so with looking at all those cultures, what has the reception been like for, some of the cultures that had like little elements in the different aspects of arts are like, how's the reception been in Korea or China or West Africa?
Well, what's made it to me has been overwhelmingly positive. I think that I've been really lucky with my readership for the most part. I think the only things that make me a little sad are when the book is overwhelmingly advertised as like West African fantasy, because it's a global fantasy book. It has so many aspects of cultures and so many things I made up. So there are some people who will come to it expecting like it basically to be a primer on, say, Nigerian culture, which I think is an unfair expectation sometimes put on authors of color, because nobody goes, say, to Lord of the Rings expecting it to be a primer on Welsh culture, even though it's heavily influenced by a lot of those mythologies and settings, right? They accept, no, Middle Earth is its own thing, you know. And but I definitely have had, I constantly got questions initially like, is this custom like actual like Yoruba culture? Is this thing Yoruba? Is this thing? And I'm just like, some of it is, some of it isn't. You know, I'm a fantasy author. First and foremost, I write about magical kids. So but I do really appreciate people who do come from those cultures who felt seen. I get those messages all the time. Like even if it's just a couple people who realize the research you did, the appreciation is just really lovely. Like I got messages from some Korean American readers who really appreciated, there's a part when Tarisai goes to Songland and she's at this kind of refugee camp for children who are supposed to be sent to the underworld. And she thinks the house is magic because the floors are heated. And they're like, no, that's just the way we build houses. And that's a very like traditional Korean house thing. They have like pipes that go under the floor that like pump hot steam and it warms the floors. And it's this like incredible technology that they've had since like what, the 1400s or something. And so just like even a little bit of detail like that, someone would message me and be like, heated floors, it's so Korean. Like things like that. So yeah, I've been really lucky with my readership.
And you do. I have to compliment you on all those little details because I've lived in a couple of the countries represented, and it's just amazingly nuanced, but also kind of creates that new world, which I appreciate since it is a fantasy novel. It's going to be a brand new world. So, so to the audience, don't forget if you have any questions, go ahead and put them in the chat or in the Q&A column, and I'm keeping a close eye on that for you. So when we decided to do this series and kind of got the idea behind the virtual author series, we had a vote last autumn on which authors that we wanted to have be part of it. And I've got to say, you're by far one of the most requested authors by our staff and by our librarians. Like the librarian community really seems to love you and embrace you. How have you been received by that community?
Well, like I said, like libraries have always been a safe space for me. I've never met a librarian I didn't like. I am told there are librarians out there that like are unlikable, and I it's not something I've experienced. I'm very biased. Just one of my favorite stories is you know, just this idea that like my town librarian is secretly an elf that never ages. Her name is Mary Goldberg. I'm not sure if she'll ever see this. She's probably retired, but she was my librarian since I was like literally a toddler. And she just has like these big square glasses and long straight gray hair. And it's been gray since I was little. And I'm like 28 now. It's just like, I don't know. It just felt like she was leveling me up because I would be like little and be like, hey, where are the little bear books? And she'd be like, right this way. Then I'd be a little older and be like, where are the princess books? And she'd be like, right this way. Then I'd be like, where are the teen angsty books? And she'd be like, right this way. And then getting to finally go back and be like, I'm an author now. I just feel like there was like she like smiled and then like went to a secret chamber and was like, the circle is complete. Like, you know, they help you grow up, you know? So yeah, librarians will always have a very, very special place in my heart, especially children's librarians, and especially children's librarians who deal with like the same annoying little kid who's there every day because she's homeschooled and finished all her schoolwork by 1 p.m. So she's going to bug you for the rest of the day. So, yeah.
I've got to say, we love those kids and children's librarians. We've got a comment from our children's librarian, Heather. She says, I really love the theme of, no, Mom, that's your dream, not mine, and how you handled it.
Yeah, thank you. I definitely think it's something anyone with mommy issues can relate to. I think especially as the child of immigrants, there's always going to be that expectation of like, you are an extension of myself. You know, we're improving our lives with these specific goals. There are standards that you must meet to make all of our effort and all of our sacrifice worth it, right? of course, with Tarisai's mother, there's a lot more personal trauma she has there, with, you know, her family, and I won't spoil it for you. But yeah, I really do find family dynamics incredibly interesting. And I feel that that is one of the most formative experiences a lot of teenagers have. I think there was a disconnect for me reading young adult fiction growing up, as much as I loved it, because the implication, especially for young girls, tended to be that the most formative experience of your teendom will be a romance. And I have found that wasn't the case for me or for lots of teenagers I know. It's your friendships and your family relationships that can really make or break you. Like, to me, a friendship breakup is more devastating than any romantic breakup. I can't even, like, I'll even tear up even thinking about like one of my best friends breaking up with me, just because it's like, I don't know. It's making friendships as a teenager is kind of how you learn how to be human in a way. Like, they shape you. They are your first chosen family. You learn how to love people that you chose. You're drawn to them for who they are, not just because you were born into the same circumstances. It's so special. And that's why Ray Bear has incredibly strong themes of like friendship dynamics and family dynamics, although there is a romance that I like. The center stage relationships do tend to be those friendships. And I love that, especially in Redemptor. You know, Dio and Tarisai's friendship has a lot more page time. It has quite a bit of page time in Ray Bear, but in Redemptor, they're kind of like processing this trauma together while all of their council siblings have to kind of spread throughout the empire for certain reasons. Even Tarisai's romantic interest kind of goes away for a little bit. Like, I've had complaints for people who just wanted book two to be like, Sanjit and Tarisai smash. but for me, I'm just like, look, like, Dio and Tarisai are each other's soulmates, not in a sexual way, but they are each other's soulmates, and that's a really important relationship. So anyway.
Yeah, and you did handle that so well with that relationship. Like, I love that Dio and Tarisai are just such a platonic, like, close relationship. And even with Dio almost verging on like asexual, like, it's just such a cool relationship that you don't really see in a lot of not only just YA fiction, but in fiction period. So like that, the friendship and the found family being centered was just so strong in both of these books.
Yeah. And honestly, that was so important to me, is just all the different kinds of love that humans are capable of and how important all of them are. Um, I've gotten really lovely letters that make me cry, from asexual teens who kind of felt something was wrong with them, again, for not just wanting to like for their relationships not just being like, we fell in love and then we smashed. It's like, you know, they'll have these strong, wonderful, absolutely intense friendships or even romantic relationships that don't have that sexual aspect, but it's just like they know that they have, like, you know, I've met asexual young adults who are just like, no, I found my life partner, you know, we want to do life together. And you know, it's so hard to know that what you have is so beautiful and so special and never see that represented, you know. I'm not an asexual person myself, but I was really moved by how much the work related to people. And I always suggest lots of other books where the asexual person is the protagonist, because they're a main supporting character in this book, but you know, everyone deserves to see themselves as the protagonist. And so I always shout out my friend Rosie Thor. She's another wonderful fantasy author, lots of Aro Ace characters as the leads, and she was actually my sensitivity reader for Dio because she is an Aro Ace person herself. So, their pronouns might be they. I know that was a recent development, but yeah, anyway, wonderful books. Yeah.
So we've got one more question from our attendees. Dan asks, which authors have inspired you, you know, during your development as an author yourself?
Whew. It's hard to know where to begin. So I'm just a very emotional person, by the way. I'm gonna try not to cry as I talk about this. I have a lot of big feelings. One of them is Gail Carson Levine, who wrote Ella Enchanted, Two Princesses of Bamar. She's this prolific middle grade fantasy author, and her world building is so rich and accessible that I kind of forget in my mind that they were middle grade books, especially Two Princesses of Bamar. That's the book of my heart. Her more famous one is Ella Enchanted, because it got adapted into this movie with like Anne Hathaway and Hugh Dancy and stuff. It was nothing like the book. But anyway, Two Princesses of Bamar is really special to me because the main relationship is between these two sisters. I always said, it did what Frozen did before Frozen was a thing, where it's like these two sisters who are very different and they love each other, and yet they represent two different ways of being a girl that was kind of revolutionary for its time. The time I was growing up, it was kind of the height of not like other girls-ness, where it was like, if you were going to be a cool girl, you had to like look down on girls who did anything considered traditionally feminine. Like, ugh, I hate pink. I just want to like be on my skateboard. and that kind of girl is wonderful and fine, but it did have this unintentional misogyny to it, where it's like, if you like traditionally girly things, you're weak, you're inferior, you should like traditionally manly things to be a cool girl. And Two Princesses of Bamar, one of the sisters is like I want a sword, I hate dresses, I'm gonna go adventure. And the other sister is like quiet and gentle and like loves embroidery. And neither sister is made to change or portrayed as inferior, and they both fight battles their way. Meryl fights with the sword. Addie escapes a dragon using embroidery. Like it's awesome, it's wild. And that was really formative for me, of realizing like, no, both of these things are okay, you can just be yourself, and neither is inferior to the other. So she's very special to me. I would like to think of us as friends now, because we're mutuals and write each other letters, and she's so great. She's like my book fairy godmother. Gail Carson Levine. Anyway, big formative author for me is also Maya Angelou. I had the pleasure of getting to experience her books for the first time as audiobooks read by her. And if you have read any of her books, if you haven't listened to the audiobooks of her reading, like, I just can't imagine anyone else reading those books. I Know Why the Caged Bird Sings in her voice is just, it's life-changing, even if you've already read the book. So just her experience of being a Black girl and finding her voice and trying anything and everything. And the reason why, funny story, the reason why she wrote any memoirs at all is because someone told her it was the hardest kind of book to write and didn't think she could do it. And she was like, oh, well, excuse you. And so she did it. And that's why we have all of these incredible memoirs, is because someone told her that it was hard. So that kind of energy is what I'd like to take into my career. And then lastly, one of my most formative authors of all time is Charlotte Bronte. She was just this very short, grumpy nerd who was brilliant and stuck in this small town. She was the daughter of a curate, and also just was like Gothic before Gothic was like even a thing. Like, a lot of her siblings died when she was like a kid or a teenager or a young adult, which was devastating, but she, handled it in the most Charlotte way possible, which is like to take the hair of her dead siblings and like lace it into her shoes. She's just, I've been to her house. It's like literally in front of a cemetery. It's just, I love her so much. She's this tiny
That's
little,
so perfect.
she's this tiny little 5'1" Gothic genius. And of course, her most famous book is Jane Eyre. Her sisters were also wonderful, Emily and Wuthering Heights. And so that kind of narrative of a young woman going out on her own and holding onto her agency with tiny, fierce fists, no matter what the standards of the Victorian day were. I related to that so much. She was also she writes about lonely young women, lonely children that grow into lonely, interesting young women. And I related to that a lot. Anybody who's read Ray Bear and loves Jane Eyre will see the similarities
Mhm.
of a young child, you know, in a manner isolated, and she goes to this place and she literally like pulls someone she loves from a fire. Like it's I'm a Bronte head. So that's the answer to that question. Yeah.
And kind of moving from inspiration to kind of your own process, what is your writing process? Are you more of a planner or a pantser or something in between?
Yes. Is the answer to that question. I have tried, oh lordy, I have tried to be a planner. Redemptor, I was like, I'm gonna make an outline that is so pure. Like if you've seen that like gleaming of the coach, like I am going to make this so organized. And it never is that way. I still think outlines are useful. I'm still trying to outline my new books under contract with my publisher that I haven't announced yet. But I know in my soul of soul that's what's going to happen is I'm going to need to just start writing the book. I will write hundreds of thousands of words and need to cut half of them because I need to write that to know what this character's world is like. And then after that, I can know what parts of everything that I wrote are the actual story and everything else is just stuff I knew. Um, and so while that's kind of a stressful way to write, because you never know if all of these things you've worked so hard on are going to make it into the final cut, it is what it is. You never know how to write a book. Just that book is something that my buddy Shannon Hale has said, and I found it really helpful. She's another favorite author of mine, by the way. She's a wonderful author and person, just an absolute princess of a person. Um, and yeah, I have found that with Ray Bearer, it is getting adapted for Netflix. I'm working with the head staff writer who's working on the pilot right now. And I will say that having just that big trunk of content is really useful because she'll email me and ask questions and I can be like, I have that somewhere. And then I'll like delve into my Google Drive and like, you know, be like, will these 3,000 words help? Here's some content. So yeah, having a surplus of information is helpful for that reason, at least.
How much creative input are you able to have with the Netflix series that's being adapted?
I don't know. I have a producer credit on the show. I do think that my relationship with the writer is really positive, but the writer has made it clear to me too that like how much she's beholden to the network. You know, like if Netflix says something isn't good for the algorithm, you know, like I think the example she gave me is like if the algorithm finds that this kind of thing showing in the first 5 minutes of an episode will make people click off, and those things can't be in the first 5 minutes of an episode. Like it's, you know, so there are just limits on what you can do, what you can contribute. I feel like I'm fairly moderate in terms of, you know, knowing that it's a story that I created, but also realizing that screen is a different medium than books. And that there are things that are going to make for better television that an experienced screenwriter like Gina Atwater, who's working on the pilot, she was the head staff writer of I think the second season of Westworld. I think there are already ideas she's had where I'm like, I see how that ups the stakes. Like I can take my time a little bit in the novel, but you need to like crank up the stakes and crank them up. So it's like there are aspects she's already experienced with where there are time limits to get some certain things done that aren't in the book. And I'm just like, okay, I see how that makes for better TV. You know, so I will say, like, I'm just one author. There are some authors who are completely hands off. Like, look, I'm not a screenwriter. Just do it. I'm going to keep writing my books. And then there's the other extreme where it's just like, no, this is my book. I need to be involved in every process, every step of the way. I don't think there's a right or wrong approach. I just know I land somewhere in the middle, and I hope that all of the characters stay brown or black. Is the thing that I said from the very beginning. I was like, you are not whitewashing this story. It's not, there are white characters, but there are lots of black and brown characters, and the kids are going to see themselves in fantasy. You're not going to take that away from them. So that's been very important to me from the beginning.
And I'm glad you stipulated that, because that's part of what made the series so amazing, was that there were so many different people represented, both, with different cultures, different races, but even like different abilities. And, I'm glad that they'll respect that diversity going forward into the series.
Hope springs eternal. So yeah.
Yeah.
I do have a lot of trust in the writer herself. She's a brilliant Black woman. But again, everyone is beholden to their boss. So we'll see.
And I had a couple quick comments. Sarah said that she loves the way that you describe Charlotte Bronte.
I thank
And
you.
then
She's
Sandy says that she loves your energy.
Oh, I thank you. Thank you so much. Yeah, I love events like this. It will be really nice when we can do more in person, but thank you for having me again.
Yeah, no, it's our pleasure. And kind of going back to your process, I know, you said there's like the best plans to plan out, and then you have to get just those words on paper to really capture it. I know you mentioned on your TikTok account that when you were writing Redemptor, it was like right during the pandemic and some of it was kind of a blur. What was that experience like?
Redemptor is one of the hardest things I've ever done. I say that in the acknowledgements in the back. The second book is always harrowing for any writer. But it being a second book, me having imposter syndrome, because you always wonder, like, hey, if everyone loved the first book, that means I can only go down from here. Like, people are going to be disappointed if I don't match the energy of the first book, but this has to be a second book. And then on top of all that, it was the pandemic, it was the protests, and I already have like clinical anxiety and depression, and just all of that made Redemptor what it ended up being. Redemptor initially was supposed to be kind of like a romp through all these different realms where she has to like basically do like mini quests for all of these rulers and win their trust, and then finally she goes down to the underworld and slugs death in the face and comes back up. And instead it became this very insular book of a teen girl trying to deal with her own depression and anxiety, taking the form of real monsters that represent both her mental health and the legacy of all of the oppression of this system that she's inheriting and that she has agency to fix, but also can't fix alone. It deals with the feeling of isolation you have when you realize something is unfair and that it needs to be fixed, but everyone else isn't as passionate about it. Even the people you love, even the people you're closest to, they don't understand like why you're so angry all the time now, why these things bug you. Like, they miss the old you. And so you distance yourself even more from the people who love you, from those communities, because you're like, well, if they don't care, I have to care enough for everybody, right? And so it's a process that I especially felt a lot of teen readers today could relate to. I think they are more socially conscious than they've ever been, and they can learn these things and feel really isolated and sad and angry at how it can feel like throwing snowballs into hell. People prepare you, at least in your mind, you can be prepared to meet bigotry, but I do think there's very little preparation for meeting apathy. It's like people who aren't bigots, but who aren't invested in moving the world forward. They're kind of just okay with things as they are. Or if they're not okay, they don't think you can really do anything to change it. So, just, stop being so emotional all the time, that kind of thing. And that can just erode and erode and erode at your happiness and your mental health. And so Tarisai has to find a balance. She has to find a balance between absolutely go live for this new world, go fight for justice, but also find a way to stay grounded in a community and realize that you are a person who deserves to live a life you're not just a tool to improve the world, but you also don't just get to like stick your head in the sand and not, you know, try and speak out or improve the world. So yeah, it's a balance that I really had to find myself. Um, and I'm still finding. It's kind of like a tightrope. I'm not sure if you ever arrive. You just always have to maintain yourself in your community and also stoke the fires of being someone who can make the world that they want alongside other people, not by yourself. You can't do it by yourself. So yeah, that's what Redemptor is all about. I guess I should display Redemptor. That's this book. This is my craft and writing rooms. Every time I take something out, I'm like trying not to knock over sewing bobbins or whatever I've been working on. So yeah.
And I do have to say, building off of that, that I think Redemptor is one of the strongest depictions I've ever seen, particularly of trauma responses and kind of that need to like recede and isolate yourself, but not live within that setting, and kind of that weird and winding path to healing and to coming to terms with who you are and what your place is in the world. I thought you approached that really well, and also just as you mentioned a little bit about approach that theme of, the whole world feels like it's on your shoulder, but it can't only be on your shoulders. And I think that's such a strong theme, the way that you approach that.
Mm-hmm. Thank you.
Yeah, and so not to give too much away, but to everyone on this, I'll say, you always worry about like the second book syndrome, but I've got to say, like, actually, I loved Raybearer. I liked Redemptor even more. So I read it and I just thought it was masterfully done. So
You have no idea.
Work on that.
To hear you say that when I've heard other people say that, just because you always wonder if you're going to be a one-hit wonder. I had a lot of confidence in Raybearer because I got to spend like 12 years on it, and Redemptor I had to write in 9 months. so just knowing it still resonated with people, that people still felt like it did the first book justice and that they related to it, it will always mean the world to me. 10 years from now, it will still mean the world to me. So thank you.
And everybody, don't forget, if you've got any questions, put them in the Q&A or the chat. So we've talked quite a bit about each novel. If you could impart one thing about your series as a whole, what would it be?
Oh, well, I feel like that's going to have a different answer depending on what reader you are. Like, I don't quite believe the author is dead, but I believe they're kind of dead in that, like, I think everyone's going to have what meant the most to them. I can share what I think would have meant the most to me reading these books. And one of them is seeing a Black girl whose worth and need to be protected and cherished and venerated is never in question the whole book. Like, there's plenty of conflict, there's plenty of trauma, but to get a little more feminist theory, like, I think there's that problem of a one size fits all empowerment message, right? So if you come from a demographic that has been put in an ivory tower and told that you're weak and need to be protected, and you can, like, your worth is always going to be like connected to how you can serve men or whatever, then what's an empowering message for you is going to be like, no, like, I can defend myself. I have a sword. I'm going to be like the blonde princess on a horse wearing pants. It's going to be great. But if you come from a demographic that historically is told that you are barely more than an animal, that you don't need protection, you need to go out and work in the fields. We're going to use your body for labor. We're going to use it for sex. We're going to, you are ugly. You're a monkey. You don't, then what's empowering representation for you might very well be that ivory tower. It might be you being in a place where all of society recognizes that you are someone who needs to be cherished and protected, you know? So like a Black girl in a princessy dress, you know, like getting given a flower crown and being treated with gentleness, you know, that's revolutionary representation, even if maybe it wouldn't be for like a skinny blonde girl who was born into privilege. Maybe the representation she needs is that, no, you can get out there and get your hands dirty. Like, that's what intersectionality is, right? And so for me, as a young Black girl who was very sensitive and emotional and liked girly things, and I think that Tari Sai being someone who is so revered by her society, even if that itself comes with a lot of baggage, because she's like, guys, you know, I'm not a goddess, right? Like I'm a teen girl. Do you really think I can just like fix everything? You know, that comes with its own pressures. But I think that as a teen girl, I would have loved that being the source of her conflict. Her conflict doesn't come from her powerlessness. It comes from how much power she has and how she has to learn how to use that responsibly and distribute it to people who have less power than her. Like that is a story that I never saw someone who looked like me get to portray. It was, if a Black girl was there at all, she was an attitude and she was sassy and she didn't need anybody, like that kind of thing. So I know that for Black girls, one of the things I'd like them to take away from it is just that you are allowed to be vulnerable. You are allowed to need help. You are allowed to be treated and need to be treated with gentleness and love and respect and veneration. And you can go slay and save the world, but you can also, you know, be in a snuggle pile of your best friends, you know, and be in a place that is soft and safe. And so, yeah, that's one of the biggest things I would have taken from these books as a teen girl.
Beautiful. We have another question from our attendees. So Dan asks, so that, you know, he realizes that, of course, the duology is within the fantasy genre, but do you have any desire to try a novel in another genre or a nonfiction novel?
Whew. Nonfiction is a little too close. Like if it was about me, it'd be a little too close to home. I definitely, while there's a lot of me and my experiences in my books, I do take a lot of comfort in that distance that a fictional world creates. I do have some unannounced projects. One is an urban fantasy, like well, it's technically not contemporary because it's like near future-ish. Haven't announced that yet. I am working on another project for a company that rhymes with Schmarvel. And yeah, right now I see myself pretty heavily in the fantasy space. It might not always be high fantasy like Raybearer, but I do like the whimsy and heightened reality that fantasy brings. So for now, that's where I am. I guess one kind of novel that doesn't involve magic that I can see myself writing in the future is kind of like a con artist or revenge kind of novel. Like I really love those juicy thrillers where it's like the narrator themselves is unreliable and they're hiding things from the reader, and it's like in the like third act you're like, wait, what? This is what they've been doing the whole time. One of the best writers doing that right now, and I actually get mad whenever I think about it, because if she was, I'm gonna say it, if she was a white man, she would be way more famous than she currently is. Tiffany D. Jackson, who wrote allegedly Grown, White Smoke. There are I now know to expect like a big twist, like just like, okay, you've been messing with me this whole time, and it still gets me every time. Like I'm not over Monday's Not Coming. I'm not over like she's, and you know, it's always the bubbly princessy ones, because I've hung out with Tiffany and she's just like lovely and cheerful. And those books, my husband has watched me just like take my ear pods out, because I usually listen to books, and then just like take a turn around the room and come back and listen. Like I needed to put my head between my knees for a second and just get my equilibrium back. So anything by Tiffany D. Jackson is a ride. I will tell you, I aspire to be able to write a book like hers one day, but yeah.
And Heather comments, Tiffany D. Jackson, Queen of Twists.
Oh Lord.
Those are the sort of novels you have to recenter yourself afterwards. It's like, oh my goodness.
Yeah, I will tell you, I will always aspire to be on her good side. It's one of those people you kind of just side eye after you've read a bunch of their books. Like, how are you such like a lovely, sunshiny person, and you have this capacity to write this kind of thing? Like, it's incredible. So, yeah.
Then one question I have for you, you had mentioned in social media that you feel sometimes like an introvert. How do you handle all the responsibilities on modern authors, like, you know, keeping up with social media, the promotional responsibilities, doing events like this?
Mm-hmm.
How do you kind of navigate that world that the modern author has to deal with now?
Whew. I will say I noped out of Twitter as soon as I could. And soon wasn't soon. Like when you're a debut, things like, especially for the young adult space, things like Twitter are unfortunately quite crucial. I would say partially for promotion, but also a lot for getting a community. A lot of my author community I met on Twitter. We've now hung out in person. We've cried together. It's been great. But we connected on social media. But I knew with my capacity for anxiety, my capacity for distraction, I needed to simplify. And so after Redemptor was released, like maybe almost a year after, I said goodbye to everyone on Twitter. I'm like, I'm not on Twitter anymore. I'm leaving. And decided to concentrate all of my focus on Instagram and TikTok, which thankfully has a lot of overlap these days because Instagram wants to be TikTok so bad, like with Reels. So you can make content for both, you know, it's kind of two birds with one stone. Yeah, I think I realized I needed a lot of simplification. And I had to think long and hard about which social media would be good for both my career and mental health, realizing that I didn't want to sacrifice either. And Instagram, at first I was just going to do Instagram. And then like Book Talk became bigger and bigger. And I was like, I should probably try this, shouldn't I? Yeah, I think that your debut, just advice for any authors out there, debut, you know, work as many of those channels as you can. But once you have an established author community, just pick one or two to really invest in. And nobody wants to hear this, but your publisher generally is really what makes or breaks your book. Your publisher and their marketing. You can work your tail off on social media and doing blog posts and things like that, but what makes bestsellers is your publisher. Some of the most successful authors out there aren't on social media at all. It's just, you know, you don't see Suzanne Collins anywhere. You don't see Stephanie Meyer anywhere, because they not only wrote fabulous books, but their promotion was like their publishers just really put their weight behind those books, and that's what made them successes. So yeah, go easy on yourself. Don't think that if your book didn't become a bestseller, it wasn't because you posted enough on Twitter or Instagram. It wasn't. That wasn't the case. Yeah, that's the advice I generally give.
Then you mentioned a couple already, but you know, with your ties within kind of the author community and stuff, who are some of your favorite current YA authors?
That's so hard because now, like, because I've gotten to hang out with so many of them, I like enmesh the people and their work. And yeah, it's hard to separate once you meet someone and they're wonderful and you already enjoyed their book, but now you just kind of like, I don't know. So I'm gonna get the total like biased ones out of the way first. I love Namina Forna, who wrote The Gilded Ones, and Roseanne E. Brown, who wrote A Song of Race and Ruin and its sequel, A Psalm of Storms and Silence. They're both fabulous people and their books are phenomenal. I will say I just got a shout out. Roseanne E. Brown's second book, A Psalm of Storm and Silence, is one of the best second books I have ever read. Like I was just texting her like a maniac reading it because I was just like, I know how hard it is to write a second book, and I know how hard it was for you to write this book with all your health problems going on, with the stress. It was very much the same situation as Redemptor. And this book, she just put her foot in it. Like this is it's so good. It's so beautifully written. It accomplishes so much that you wouldn't think you could accomplish in just 2 books. Like it's in my opinion, it's better than the first book, and the first book was great. Like that is very, very hard to do. There's second book syndrome is a real thing. So yeah, Roseanne E. Brown, so cool. Watch whatever she's doing. She also was like always writing 8 things at the same time. She's incredible. I couldn't do that. So yeah, Roseanne E. Brown. And let's see, Shannon Hale is just, she writes so many wonderful things, but is also a wonderful person. One book of hers that I don't think got enough love at all, I don't know why people just slept on this book or kind of met it, Maz and MEH, like is oh crap, I'm Kind of a Big Deal. It is a contemporary teen fantasy comedy about a teen girl who just graduated from high school and was like the best at theater, and then finds out that on a like broader adult scale, she's actually pretty mediocre in theater. And she has put her whole identity around this. And so she kind of like escapes into these different books, but it turns out the escapes are like real. It's kind of like a sinister magic curse where she's in these books, but it's also really funny. And I don't know. Shannon tends to write things in spaces that haven't been filled before. She writes for like age groups that don't have as many books in representation, like kind of right in that like kind of 10, 11, 12. I don't know. All I'll say about Shannon is whenever I read any of her books, I've never read anything like it before. So she's always really cool to explore. And let's see, other people, Kwame Mbalia is amazing. His Tristan Strong books are just beautiful. Again, have done things that have never been done before. Contemporary fantasy having to do with like Black American mythology, like not just African mythology, but specifically Black American. With like, you know, there's so many myths and like creatures unique to Black Southern culture that I haven't seen represented in heightened fantasy like that. So that's really cool. Let's see. Oh, obviously Tracy Dion. She's obviously a really big deal, legend born and all that stuff, but it's worth the hype. They're really great books. She's a really awesome person. I love her books and I can't wait to see what else she works on. So off the top of my head.
Very cool.
Yeah.
Well, so in addition to like the physical books being beautifully produced, quite a few of us are also really big fans of the audiobook versions of your books.
Yes, Janice is so cool.
Yeah, so they're just really well done. Heather has a question because she recently listened to Ray Bear, and then just before that, she listened to White Smoke. She's wondering if you know if it's the same narrator because you know the similarities.
Jonice Abbott Pratt works. Like she was narrating my book. She was narrating Tracy's book. She was narrating Tiffany D. Jackson's books, like all at the same time. We all have these books coming out at the same time, and Jonice had narrated all of them, has completely different voice registers for all of these different characters and these different side characters. Like she just does not quit. She's fabulous. I actually got to do an event with her. I think the interview might be in my Instagram TV videos. I'm not sure. If not, it's probably on her account. But she's incredibly talented. I got to listen to a couple audition clips for different narrators when they were deciding who to do for Raybearer, and her voice just stood out like neck and shoulders. So yeah, I was very lucky to get to work with her.
And she even handled like the different like musical elements really well as well. Like I couldn't picture anyone else doing those sections. And when I went and reread it in just regular book form afterwards, I could hear her singing those songs.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah, and honestly, like I have so much respect for audiobook narrators because I didn't realize before how little direction they get. Like it's a lot of it's just her, like, oh, this is a song, I guess I gotta come up with some kind of melody that works here. you know I always thought that there was a little bit more like production to it, like maybe there's someone else working with them, and I'm sure that there's some of that, but from talking to Jonice, a lot of it's just her in the studio. So much respect to audiobook narrators.
and then to everyone listening in, last call for questions. So while we're waiting there to see if there are any last questions, I know you hinted at a few things, including Schmarvel. Is there anything you're working on right now that you're particularly excited about?
I am. One is, oh gosh, how can I even, I don't know how much I'm allowed to say. I will say that one of the books I'm working on is a romance. And, romance does usually tend to take a back seat in my books, even though it's usually present. I really wanted to try my hand at romance kind of taking a more front seat, just because what romantic books often end up being is a really close case study of people and interactions and what they mean. It's one reason why I really like novels of manners like Jane Austen, is that it just is like a very, like taking a microscope to people and how they act in certain social situations. And while this isn't a novel of manners, it's not like, it's not like lots of people in a room talking and like making sketches of people's characters. It is a little bit more of an adventure romp. The one thing I think I can say is that it's loosely inspired by Howl's Moving Castle, which is my favorite Miyazaki film. But yeah, that's what I'm working on right now. I really like the characters. I will say that one of them you might have met before, and it's probably not what you were expecting. So
Now I'm very intrigued.
yeah.
All right, so last call for questions. So on top of, your novels coming up and everything, do you have any other events coming up that you'd like to talk about, or anything else tied to your career that you're particularly excited about in the future?
I'm doing a lot of school visits, which obviously aren't going to be open to like the public, but there's an event I'm doing for Blackstone Audio. It's like a collaboration of like authors and narrators talking about their books together. It's in Portland. It's an in-person event, although I'm sure maybe they have some virtual streaming options. And that's fairly soon. I think that's in a couple weeks, more than a couple. I think it's like March 20 something. But that'll be fun. I've never done an event like that before. I think it's the PLA conference. I think that's what it is. I think that's what it's called. It's in Portland. Yeah, I guess a lot of travel and events are either streamable or you gotta be there. So just watch my social media to see where I'll be going. I post on Instagram. I'm not as good at updating my events calendar on my website, but I'll try for you guys.
Awesome.
Yeah.
Right, so we'll wrap up. First off, to everyone listening, if you haven't picked them up yet, pick up your copies of Raybearer and Redemptor. You definitely won't regret it. They're amazing books. I've got a couple copies at home because I got one for my adopted daughter as well. So, and then I guess we'll just wrap it up with, is there anything else that, you'd like to tell us moving forward, or anything, if you could be asked anything in one of these events, what would it be?
If I could be asked anything?
Mhm.
Oh, I don't know. I really like talking about clothes. Anyone who's read my book knows how much I like this. Is like I'm being very strategic with what you see in this room, but what you don't see are like reams of fabric and like my sewing machine that's right here. Let's see. I don't know. I feel like this would be really boring to anyone who isn't like a fabric nerd, but I love getting to describe different fabrics and the history of certain fabrics that I get to talk about in the book. Some fabrics that I describe in Rebera and Redemptor, most of them are real West African fabrics. A dire cloth is this beautiful resistance dyed cloth. So it's like you paint in wax on a fabric, and then you dye it, and then you put it in hot water so that the wax melts away and has left a pattern undyed. So it's like these really intricate patterns, and sometimes they tell stories. And a dire cloth is made by the Yoruba. There's also a shoke, which is it's spelled ASOKE, which is just this very finely woven, often like sometimes with metallic threads, fabric. I wore some for my wedding. It's really beautiful. There's also a dinkra cloth, which is from Ghana, and it has it's usually like really vivid contrast patterns of oh gosh, I'm trying to remember what the name of the script is, but like all of the symbols mean different things, and it's often really colorful. And then there's kente, which is also Guinean. So yes, I guess I could have fun if people ask me about fabric more, but it would probably mostly just be fun for me.
But hey, how awesome would it be to have like a Ray Bear fashion show or something to
Yes.
illustrate all of these costumes that you've pictured in the different types of fabric?
I will say that if, fingers crossed, the Ray Bear show makes it to production, they will have to like frisk me as I leave the Ray Bear set, because I will be tempted to steal some costume fabric and things like that. So we'll see.
Yeah. Well, thank you again so much for doing this event with us. We really appreciate it. We're a small library out in Cave Creek, Arizona, and we're just honored to have you. So thank you again, and we wish you the best of luck with all of your amazing projects coming up.
Thank you so much. It's been my pleasure to be here. Thanks for having me.